Okay, so what we want to look at now is some different ways that have been suggested or proposed to reduce the development gaps and the divide between low income and high income countries. One of the most commonly used ones of these is something that we refer to as foreign direct investment, or FDI. And the idea behind this is that generally foreign companies will invest heavily in a country. Generally, these companies will be from high-income countries, and they invest in a low-income country through creation of like factories or other sort of employment facilities, research and development, and so on. Now, the idea behind this is that foreign direct investment, that creation of a company or some kind of sort of establishment, will result in training for local people, resulting in an increase in the expertise and skills of local peoples. A really good example of this would be, for example, the Foxconn factories in China, where Apple have invested a huge amount of money into educating their workers in kind of the construction of iPads and iPhones. So they've got quite a high-tech education. Also, it means that these countries have a more valuable export on offer to trade. Rather than predominantly focus on primary products, they maybe have manufactured or high-tech goods that allow them to trade with other countries and therefore increase their income. That links into that sort of third point as well, and the fourth point about increasing tax income. If you've got more trade, you've got better paid jobs, you've got large companies such as Apple operating in your country, you're also going to receive increased tax income from that money that's been made by the company, by the workers. As a result of that, you're going to be able to have more money to invest in things like improving education and healthcare. However, there are major concerns behind foreign direct investment. The predominant one of these is the bottom one there, economic leakage. Obviously, if you've got a company, as I said, like Apple, or if we think about our Nigeria case study, Shell, operating out of Nigeria, a lot of the money that's made by that company actually doesn't go back in to the local economy. It goes back to the country of origin of that company, and that money leaves the local area. We term that economic leakage, so obviously a major problem. We also see the risk of environmental damage. A lot of these companies directly invest in these countries because they know that there's not as tight restrictions on environmental sort of pollution, etc. So therefore, we see high amounts of environmental damage. Again, thinking about Nigeria case study, oil mining in the Niger Delta has caused significant damage that could take 30 years of cleaning up. And obviously, we then also risk high exploitation of workers. Thinking about your kind of sweatshop ideas, poor working conditions, long hours, no contracts, poor pay, and so on. We also have kind of more traditional aid. Okay, aid is basically a form of help given from one country to another, or from a charity, which is often referred to as a non-government organisation, to a country or region. We may see aid being given in terms of long-term aid. We may see aid coming from one country or so to one other, which we call bilateral aid. We maybe see it being given by several countries and maybe parts, for example, the United Nations to another country, by which point we refer to it as multilateral aid. It may be long-term, so we'll be looking at providing things such as improved healthcare, education and other infrastructure, or it may be short-term, for example, providing aid in the direct aftermath of an emergency or a natural disaster, so on. Really, the positives and negatives of aid come down to whether or not it's tied or untied aid. Untied aid generally has a more positive impact. Untied aid is when a country, where the donor country gives the aid without any expectations of it being repaid or any interest being paid back, or any kind of agreement that the country receiving the aid has to sort of work along with. Tied aid, however, the country is given the aid, but they do expect something back. That maybe they expect the aid to be repaid with obviously added interest, or they may expect the country that receives it to then kind of agree to trade relationships with the country. We also see this idea of intermediate technology. Okay? The idea behind this is to provide low-income countries with technology that can be designed to be usable and maintainable by local people in the low-income country, but still improve their standard of living. For example, there's no point giving them incredibly high-tech sort of facilities that they are not trained to use or cannot maintain, very expensive to run, very expensive to fix. The idea is that these technologies should work and fit in with their kind of traditional lifestyles, but provide them with a way of improving their standard of living. One of the most common things that's been used in a lot of low-income countries is the provision of what we call micro-hydro electricity plants. So these are basically kind of small generators that use fast flowing water, for example, in steep mountainous rivers to generate electricity in areas that are remote and cut off from it. Most commonly as well, we see something called a growing trend in the provision of microfinance loans. So this is when a small amount of money is given, generally from a high-income country, to people who are living in low-income countries who normally wouldn't be able to get a loan, maybe due to a poor credit rating and a seemingly lack of income or education. The idea behind this is that they'll be given this loan to then be able to start up their own business and lift themselves out of poverty. The loans given through the microfinance scheme generally have a low or non-existent interest rate, again meaning that they don't need repaying. Once a business has been set up, if it's successful, the person is then able to support themselves. However, it is reliant on that business being successful. Fair trade. Now, most people have heard of fair trade. The idea behind this is it's a scheme designed to give a better deal for producers of primary products in low-income countries that are required by high-income countries. So, for example, the most commonly thought of fair trade products are bananas. Okay, the idea is that this will prevent exploitation of primary producers, making sure they get a fair amount of the money made from the selling of that product in the high-income country. That money can then be invested in things such as improving education and healthcare in the area, or improving farm yields for the primary producers. One of the major problems, however, with fair trade, despite the fact that now over 4,500 products can now bear the fair trade mark, is that consumers are not always willing to pay the higher price. Therefore, it's not always the most highly purchased product in supermarkets. Also, on top of that, the cost of achieving fair trade certification for many low-income farmers is so high, that they actually are unable to do so, or they actually start losing money just simply by producing these fair trade products. And finally, we have the idea of debt relief, or at least freezing interest rates on debt owed by low-income countries to high-income countries. If we think back to the 1970s, many low-income countries took out large loans from the World Bank in an attempt to improve their infrastructure. However, in many cases, this was poorly spent due to corruption or mismanagement, and therefore the debt has spiraled out of control, with interest rates sometimes becoming so extensive that countries can't even afford to pay this back. The idea behind this is if high-income countries agree to cancellation of this debt, the money that has been spent on trying to repay it can actually be invested in improving infrastructure such as education, and healthcare, rather than paying back the debt. However, there have been no real consistent agreement worldwide between countries to cancel debt, with some countries like the UK agreeing in quite large amounts to cancel pretty much most of the debt owed by other countries to it, while several other countries haven't agreed to cancel the debt at all.